7 stages of growth. You're thinking there's always talking about steps and stages and processes. Sorry. I'm Canadian, so I say processes, not processes. When it comes down to making sure that you can grow your business, really look introspectively on how you can take what you've got, improve it, better process, better people, better collaboration. This is the world that is being made better by Carl Gould and his team at 7 Stage Advisors, and he's about to join the DiscoPosse podcast right now. What's up, friends? Welcome back to the show. My name is Eric Wright. I'm the host of your DiscoPosse podcast. That's a weird name because I'm DiscoPosse. It's a long story. I wrote about it somewhere. Hopefully you can hunt it down. But this isn't about me. This is about Carl Gould. He is the founder of 7 Stage Advisors, an incredible person, just somebody who I really spent a lot of joyful time in this conversation with. And we're lucky because you also get to enjoy this conversation. I don't want to belabor the point. So let's just get right to the good stuff. But there's more. In fact, there's one more tiny thing, a tiny request. Just tiny request. Can you do me a favor? Can you just hit that like button or subscribe? Actually, do both. Drop a comment if you can. The reason is because we are running lots of really great programs, and it's coming out through the subscriber community. So if you're a subscriber, you get access to some wicked cool stuff. You don't even need to take a newsletter. You can if you want. Go to DiscoPossePodcast.com. Different problem, different story. This is it. We're actually doing some really neat stuff beyond the podcast. It's about to come out, so get on in. Anyways, speaking of get on in, this is Carl Gould of 7 Stage Advisors. If you're a business owner or you're at all involved in startups and operating a company, operating a team, really fantastic lessons. So let's just jump in.
Hi, this is Carl Gould. I'm the CEO of 7 Stage Advisors, and you're listening to the DiscoPosse podcast.
Thing of beauty. You're a pro at this stuff. This is why I like getting professionals on board here. So, Carl, thank you very much. This was a really neat treat when I saw your name come up on a guest list, because I thought, good golly, like I'm literally in this space constantly, both through my own direct work in my own startup world, as well as with advisory and lots of other folks. And when I saw the opportunity to be able to have you on, it was really exciting, because the one thing that we really don't get a chance to do is to be able to go to people who've been successful in the path we wish to walk. And one of the most common problems is everybody, because we're humans, we start to walk that path alone and then figure it out the hard way. So, Carl, if you want to give yourself an intro for folks that are new to you here in the audience, and then we'll talk about the work that you've done and ultimately how that's affecting what you're doing with your firm, and the goal of, what makes Carl Gould tick, and what is the 7 Stage Advisors?
Sure. So thank you. This is great. I love the opportunity to share whenever I can. So my journey, my path started out, I was going to college for accounting and finance. I had a pretty bad leg injury and I had to leave school, and I was paying my own way for everything. So as one of 10 children and a large family, there are not a lot of handouts going around in our family. So you had to, whatever you wanted, you earned, you worked for. And so I realized that I wasn't going to be able to go back to school where I was at. I started my first entrepreneurial venture just as a way to make some money. I knew landscaping, I knew landscape design and installation because I did it in high school. And so I started my first business. I grew that business every year for 7 years, and then I sold it. Then I started a construction and real estate development company. Owned that business for 12 years, sold that. But all the while I was doing coaching as a side hustle. So I was part of the gig economy before there were gigs,
Before it was a thing, right?
Before it was like a thing, And speaking of that, if there were hashtags at the time, the hashtag would have been hang up the hammer, because I wasn't crazy about my construction business. I was good at it. It was successful, but it wasn't my thing. It wasn't my passion. I found my passion in coaching and speaking and helping others. And really what that led me to was a life of working with small to mid-market business owners, showing them how to differentiate their business, because I had to hustle my way. I didn't have a lot of mentors. I didn't have a lot of coaches in the beginning. I kind of had to find my way. As a matter of fact, when I started coaching, there were no real processes at the time. I was doing coaching for Tony Robbins and Stephen Covey and Franklin Covey Planning and Dale Carnegie Leadership and Situational Leadership by Ken Blanchard. And there was the model, but not necessarily the coaching method. So I wrote a coaching method that is widely used today. So that was kind of my contribution to the coaching and consulting community, was to do that. And since 2002, well, since 91, I've been coaching, but since 2002, we've been working with companies now in over 68 countries. And we've been working with companies of all sorts, how to differentiate, how to scale their business and bring the owner from an owner-operated, self-employed to a true business owner, running a true business machine that generates cash without them being there.
Yeah, and it's an interesting thing that, right? You can become an owner-operator in the same way you can become a parent. There's no license required. It's very limited amounts of, the point of entry is fairly easy. You can just jump in, get started, even if you're doing this sole proprietor. You don't even need to go the LLC route. You just go out, it doesn't even need to be hanging a shingle. You could literally just, as you and I both started, right? Just grab a lawnmower, get out there and start doing business. But what they don't tell you is that you are entering into a sea of first mistakes as well as first experiences. And so when you looked at your folks that you were looking to as mentors, and you've named a lot of incredible folks that we all, like they literally wrote the books on these things. A lot of us grew up, we read Awaken the Giant Within. We read How to Win Friends and Influence People, publishing date in the 20s, by the way, right? People don't even realize that Carnegie's been at this for a while. They think of it as if he's long since passed, and that was the problem, is that we never revisit these things ourselves. We read the book, we think we've learned the lesson, but then we don't revisit coaching. We don't revisit changes as we grow the business. So, how did you learn yourself to take these methodologies or take these, sort of systems and then come together with the 7-stage approach and your coaching approach?
Yeah, well, in the very beginning, when I started coaching, it was 1991. And I said, I really love this. I want to do this full time. But coaches at the time, full-time coaches made about $23,000 a year, according to one study that I kind of participated in. And 10 years later, I participated in another study, and full-time coaches were making $78,000 a year. And I'm like, wait a minute, I live in New Jersey. I've got a family, a house. You can't live on it. You simply can't live on it. And there was an expression back then that coaches had to take a full-time job in order to feed their coaching addiction, because you couldn't make any money on it. And so so what I said was, okay, how do I manage an engagement? How do I manage a session? How do I acquire a client? What do I tell them? And so since I was looking around and I couldn't find, the Bible or the playbook at the time, I started writing it down. And I really did it just for me. The goal, though, was you had to be able to invoice at least 6 figures. If you were going to, after taxes and everything else, if you weren't invoicing 6 figures, you're not the primary breadwinner in your family, likely. Certainly not where I live.
Right.
And so I said, I've got to be able to invoice at least $100,000, so there's enough left over so I can live in New Jersey, have a family, and this be my primary job, And so I was able to do that. In other words, I created this model. But at the time, I was doing a lot of DISC behavioral assessment, profiling, and debriefing with our clients. That was a pretty standard tool at the time. And it still is, but there are many others. At the time, that was the tool. And so I remember I'm sitting down with a couple of clients. And first client was owner of a $250,000 printing company in New Jersey. My next client was a high-ranking executive in IBM. And I remember debriefing their DISC profile. And I said, okay, what do you consider your strengths? What do you consider your blind spots to be? Now let's talk about your business or your division. What do you consider to be their strengths? And what do you consider to be their blind spots. And interestingly enough, even though they're vastly different organizations, the personality of the business mirrored the personality of its leader or owner. And I said, wait a minute, whoa. So I said, okay, well, what if there's 4 quadrants to your individual personality, what if there was a corresponding business function that, because of your strengths and blind spots, there'd be an overlap between the business and the person? And so we created this profile that said, you're going to fill out a questionnaire, and I'm going to learn about your business in each of the 4 quadrants: strategy, business development, operations, and finance. And we all have, 4 basic dimensions of our behavior, and we just do them in varying degrees. And every business has the same 4 functions. And so I started to notice that where the individual was strong, the business was strong. Where the individual was weak, the business was weak. And so now we've done hundreds of thousands of these. I think it's 291,000 at last count. We have validated that the personality of a business will mirror the personality of its owner. So I wrote this whole methodology as if the business were a person. Well, if I was coaching a person and did their DISC assessment, I know how to do a coaching engagement off of that, do it all the time. What if they were a business? Well, they've got 4 parts of their personality. Well, what would I do to grow each part of that personality? What would have to happen? How would I get it scored from a 1 to a 10? What would the path be? And it really took on. And so over time, the word got out that they're all like, well, all right, you're coaching, Carl, but what are you doing full time? I'm like, this is it. They're like, no. But I mean, like, how are you paying for your medical benefits? What? No, this is it. Yeah. All right, it's fine. But you have a second income? You're relying on someone? No, this is it. And so a number of people wanted to learn how I was doing it. And from that point on, we've trained or certified or accredited somewhere in the neighborhood of about 7,000 coaches worldwide on all or parts of the methodology, because they realize that this is a model that you can build a whole practice around. And so that's kind of really what put me on the map in the early 2000s.
But and it's really interesting too, because we always had the sort of struggle of like an organization, it's like, is it the sum of the parts? Like how much is part of the collective? How much is top down? How much ultimately is bottom up? As the organization grows, how does that begin to change as management layers and tiers begin to affect the organizational structure? I mean, there's even a simple thing called known as Conway's Law, right? Where an organization will design a system which emulates its communication patterns. Ultimately, so if you've got a development team, this is one of the most common ones I bump into all the time. If you have 3 developers, they will develop as a small service group. And if you have 12 developers, but you put them in pods of 3, they will learn to interact and become loosely coupled and design systems as such, but if you take 80 developers and give them 1 project manager and 1 development team lead, they're going to build a monolithic system, right? And finance, marketing, everything emulates the same thing. But for whatever reason, we seem to think that it's separated. Is this just a human hope that business and people are different? Where do you think it comes from?
Right. Well, it's funny because as much as we've advanced, this is one of my big takeaways. As we are so unique, and we all have our own fingerprint, we all have our own DNA, and we are so different. We are such creatures of habits, and we are very predictable. We are very predictable creatures. And, it's funny, like, you remember those movies, Alien?
Yeah.
Right. In the beginning, in the first Alien, the alien gets inside of a human, and the alien comes out with 2 legs. And then in a later movie, the alien gets inside of a dog. You're never going to guess how many legs the alien had when it came out. And so we are like film projectors. Whatever you put on the inside, however we define ourselves, whatever identity we give ourselves, we broadcast out onto the screen of our life. And what we do is we design a life around us based on how we define and identify ourselves on the inside. So if I'm a truck guy, what kind of vehicle do you think I drive? It's probably a truck.
Yeah.
I probably live in a truck neighborhood. I probably have a truck family. I probably do truck things on the weekends. However, if I get a Porsche, if I'm a Porsche guy now, I probably drive a Porsche. I live in a Porsche neighborhood. I have Porsche family. I do Porsche things on the weekends. I make Porsche money. right? One's not better than the other, but how we do, a few things is how we do a lot of things because we're so much like that. So we tend to build a world around us based on how we define ourselves internally. And so that's why I think that no matter how much different things get, we're still replicating ourselves on the outside.
And the interesting thing comes, especially as you design an organization, if you don't set effectively the vision, the personality, and the standards by which you're going to measure success and everything within, if you don't set that at the beginning, it will define itself if you're not sort of imprinting that. There's a certain amount. So this is the interesting thing I'd love to hear from you. As you look at somebody who comes to you and they say, Carl, I've got this, moderate sized organization. I've got 25 people working for me, just signed on a co-founder, whatever, some scenario where they're like, but I feel like this business is not the business that I started.
Right.
And it's a common scenario that I bump into all the time. People are like, I feel like I've lost control of the business. And then that itself is a loaded phrase. And I know this is something that you have a lot of good content on.
Well, how do you address the last one? Well, when you first said, I think I've lost control of my business, my first thought was, good. Thank God. You're the worst manager in the damn business. Give the control to the managers. Wouldn't that be great? Have managers actually manage, And so, so there's a part of me that says good, because business owners in their nature are micromanagers and they're control freaks. And only I can open the mail, and only I, Eric, can go get lunch and bring it back, because only I know how to order the perfect burrito. And so they won't. And so there's a couple of fears. The first fear that we hear all the time is, well, yeah, what if I hand it over to them and they screw up and alienate my biggest client? Okay, legit fear. But the other fear they have is, well, what would you need me for if everybody's doing everything? Right? And so part of their attachment to their emotional attachment to their product or their service or their idea is actually what ends up holding the business back. I mean, think about a bottleneck. Where does it happen? At the top of the bottle, right? And so we see, especially when we start working with a client, way too many stuff funnels through a couple, 2 or 3 people in the top of the organization. There could be 100, 200 employees, but everything funnels through like 1 or 2 or 3 people. That is so unhealthy for an organization. And so so first off, we like the idea that you're giving up control of your business. I don't mean control, and we want you to give up control of the day-to-day activities, not the results, because you can delegate authority, but you can't delegate responsibility. At the end of the day, it's always that flows upstream, and that there's one person at the end of that, and you're at the end of that. You take full responsibility of everything that happens in your organization. But you do need to spread the authority around to have your team make decisions on their own. And so for a business owner, I created something called the 7 stages of business success. And there are 7 very distinct stages that a business owner will go through. And absolutely, stages 1, 2, 3 are growth stages. And that's where you're still doing the work. You're an owner operator, a lot of adrenaline. Everyone's wearing a lot of hats. But stages 4, 5, 6, and 7 are your stages of scalability. And that's where if you don't give up control of the day-to-day and the minutia, the business can't scale. It can grow, but it can't scale. And so we need the business owner to cut the umbilical cord from having to have their hand in everything, hand it off to the people and let them do their job, and then empower them to continue to take initiative, solve problems, and grow the business. It doesn't mean you don't have your hand in things. You are there to follow up, encourage, provide resources, remove roadblocks. Those are the things that you're there to do. But you have to get things done through other people, which is a totally different skill than being an owner-operator.
There's a thing that came out of, I'll say it was noted most strongly recently from Amazon. They did a book from some of the original Amazon team called Working Backwards. And one of the things that they stressed, of course, because obviously the scale of Amazon is incredible, is they have to, as you described, right, assign ownership throughout the organization and completely surrender and delegate that ownership. And they call it single-threaded ownership as well. They're even so strict. They're like, if you're a VP or director or senior director and you've got 4 projects on the go, then 4 projects aren't going to get done well. They basically say, like, that's it. You own this from inception to outcome. And because of that strong single-threaded ownership within the organization, they act as the original leader, founder did in the first days. And to be able to scale, they then kind of ultimately just replicate this out. But like you said, it's methodologies, right? And it's tough. It's really tough. Like, human instinct is like, oh, if I hand over the entire messaging and of this new platform or whatever, it's a really tough thing, especially as a founder. Like, they tend to be a type A personality. They like to, feel like if I touch it, it feels real. That they're,
well, my name's on the building, Eric. You want me to give up that? That's my name on that building.
Yeah,
that's part of the problem. It's your damn name on the building. Should be the team's name, or your name should mean something, like Carnegie. Your name should mean something more than just your last name. Right. It should be about your guiding principles or the core values that you're built on.
It's you almost want to tell them, like, you know who the CEO of Heinz is? His name is not Heinz, right? Do you know who the CEO of, all X company X? You name the company. It's like, they've survived decades through multiple leaders and grown and been successful because at some point someone said, this business is itself. I am simply a leader of the current stage of this business, right? And you choose how much you can accept. But yeah, I mean, it is tough when your name is on the building.
Just go talk to somebody who's an investment banker or an M&A, merger and acquisition advisor, and you ask them what is their biggest problem when they buy a founder-led business. They say one of the first things we need to do is we either have to convince that founder to show them how to scale, or we have to get rid of them so we can scale, because they're the thing that is holding them back. But one thing on the single thread management that you mentioned, responsibility, we have a model we call one metric management. So I'll keep it really simple for all of you business owners who are trying to figure out, how do I delegate? How do I do all this? What can I possibly do? First thing you do is take any business function in your business and do what's called a process map. And it's basically a workflow. Who does what in what order? Think of a relay race. Runner 1 hands off the baton to runner 2, and they each have their role and they run around. So there's a bunch of boxes. Who does what in what order? Step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. Take each box and assign an owner. Eric, you have box number 1. Carl, you got box number 2. All right, got it. And then you say, what would be success in this box? What is the one metric we are going to assign to this box to say we've done it right? Maybe it's percentage of orders fulfilled. Maybe it's your cost of goods cost, your gross margin. Maybe it's how quickly you turn it around. Maybe it's your reviews or your net promoter score. Whatever it is, pick one. And then put that person in charge of that box and that metric. And all you do is manage them to that metric. So think about it for a second. I'm in box number 2, you're in box number 1. If I say, all right, great, thank you, I own box number 2. Well, who do I have to make friends with to make sure that I do my job well? Box number 1 and box number 3. I can't act on my own. By its very nature, I've got to make friends with you, Eric, in box number 1, and Jane or John in box number 3, because you're going to hand me some things and I got to do my thing with it. And then I've got to hand it off. I have an output that I give to the next box. And so by its very nature, I have to communicate throughout the workflow. I cannot work in a silo because you've put me in charge of a metric that requires inputs and outputs from other people. And so we have found that the one metric management works really well, because at the end of the day, most of your team, they don't care about anything else. I remember one of my last jobs, I was a bartender, professional bartender. And I mean, I would be concerned. I would show, that I was worried if one of the bouncers didn't show up that night. But what did I care? I'm not getting in trouble if the bouncers don't show up. I'm not getting in trouble if they don't collect enough money at the front door, right? The cover charge. I got in trouble if my liquor cost was off, I upset a client, a customer, or I, didn't show up for my shift, or something to do with the bar. So give me my metrics for the bar. At the end of the day, that's all I care about. And then you can manage me around that.
Now, this brings up the other interesting challenge, and I'll say you often find where a leader comes in versus a person that's been put in charge. In that same way that you assign responsibility and give them that sort of one box, one metric, one goal, where do you find sometimes where people also then get the, not my circus, not my monkeys? Like, you got a problem in your box, you let me know how it goes, Carl, because my box is going great. Like, is there ever, how do we deal with that as we find that people may become a little bit sort of siloed and attached to their metric as their success and not concerned about the greater good?
Well, sure. So you're in all what I'm about to say will cover almost all cases, but so let's start there. So if I'm in box number 2 and you're screwing up box number 1, you are impacting me. I have a vested interest in the box to my left, and everybody does. Because if Eric doesn't do box number 1 well, I can't do box number 2 well. And if I don't do box number 2 well, John or Janie can't do box number 3 well. So going upstream, we are all typically concerned about the box behind us, right? Because that box, we need that input from that box in order, that function, in order to do it. When I was a bartender, I was very concerned about the bar backs because they would stock the beer and liquor into the bar. Without that, I can't run a bar. So I was always very, very concerned with them. Now, if somebody else on the other side impacts my metric, I'm concerned about that too. Because when I was a bartender, I was a young guy, didn't really understand a lot about restaurant business, but my boss showed me my one metric, and it was liquor cost. And they sat me down and they said, hey, Carl, your liquor cost has to be between 19 and 21%. Over 21%, and we're going to think you're stealing from us. Under 19%, we're going to think you're stealing from the customer. And I was like, oh, wow, gosh, I just thought I was pouring drinks here. And so this is after my first month of working, and I said to them, I'm like, what's my number? And they said, well, your number's 23. And I said, really? You think I'm stealing from you? Now, remember, I was only 30 days into the job. And these guys were funny, kind of sarcastic. And so they said, no, Carl, we don't think you're stealing. We think you still suck at your job. But yes, 3 months from now, if it's a 23, yes, we are going to think you're stealing from us because you'll know how to do it at that point. And so they gave me some tips. So I'm thinking about this the whole time. I'm like, gosh, what am I doing? And it dawned on me. So I'm talking to the bar backs, and they're loading my bar. I'm pouring drinks like crazy. And so I take the drinks, I leave an order to the side for one of the servers. She comes up, puts everything on the tray, starts walking, dumps the whole tray. The whole tray fell. And then it hit me. I'm like, that's where some of my liquor cost goes. And so I brought all the servers together during one of the breaks, and I said, we're going to train on how to load the tray. That does not happen again, because all of those, I realized that liquor cost doesn't go on their box, went on mine.
Right.
So if there's any other box that impacts me, I'm going to be very interested that we work together to get your box well. And in the overwhelming majority of business activities, there's enough overlap that I have to be concerned about other people's boxes. There will be some times where, like, the server's across the room and she dumps food. I'm like, no, it sucks to be you. That doesn't do anything for me. Right? And if she keeps doing it, to some extent, I can help her. But that's where I think managers come in and say, all right, you're struggling here. Let's work on that. There's no other line worker that can really help you here. This is more of an organizational challenge. But if you set up the one metric management system right, the team self-polices because they simply can't get their job done without the help of others.
Well, that's what I was going to say. In effect, you've created a mesh protection that each body, each entity has its, left and right reach, forward and back, up and down, whatever it's going to be. And then in the same geometric way, that next person, ultimately you've got complete coverage as long as everyone is looking to their left and looking to their right and protecting the flow Uh, it also some of the phrasing comes up, and it reminds me of Eli Goldrat. So one of the famous folks
Sure.
in
The
Toyota
goal.
manufacturing and the goal. And in development, I know this one too very well because it ultimately spawned what we call DevOps, as a methodology, and Gene Kim and a lot of folks. And
Theory of constraints. Yeah.
right, and it is so radically simple when you see it in play, but it's a behavioral change to adopt. But once you do, you're like, oh, easy, right? Let's just look on the line and look where the bottleneck is, and ultimately you subjugate that constraint, thus releasing it to the next phase. If you have now you've moved the constraint, does it still exist? Does it change? And it becomes a way of measuring, and then ultimately creating a better flow across the system, which then creates profitability in the end. That's the
Yeah.
goal.
Right.
Now, this is an
Yeah.
interesting
No
thing
question.
as well, that one thing that does come from in its perfect self-policing system, it should work. And then there's also this idea that sometimes, and I guess I sort of implicated this before, right? That someone's going to be like, hey, like I kind of only care about my bits, right? Someone often says, and Goldrat quotes this, show me how you measure me and I'll show you how I behave.
Correct.
So
right on.
You assign the metric and that becomes the only thing that you care about because you're paid based on that thing. How do we prevent that?
Yeah. So this is tricky. So here's where I'll share with you what my observation is. My observation is that often business owners share too much information with their line workers. I'll say anything below the manager level. And what it does is it scares them and it unsettles them. Going back to the personality of an employee chooses employment, traditional employment, because they like predictability, they like security, they like consistency. And so if you're blinding them with this huge dashboard, like, you're in sales, but let me show you what's going on in the factory. Like, really? So you can overwhelm your staff. So we very much like simplicity. Now, the trick with the one metric management is the right metric, because the metric has to have implications that other parts of the business, will also, celebrate success with your success. And so there is some truth to it. And if you were to take a line worker and say, well, here are all the things that impact the business, the importing, the exporting, wait a minute, I'm like Joe Rivet. I do 4 rivets on a door here in step number 47. You're telling me about the supply chain somewhere in China that I know nothing about, and we have found that just unsettles a company. And so I totally agree. Show me the behavior and I'll show you the incentive, or
at the same time, we have to find the balance of making sure that whatever metric we give to that person is relevant to that person and they can understand it. Here's an example. In almost no company will any one employee ever make as much money as the business will in 1 year. Right. I'm a $50,000 a year employee, $1 million business. You tell me that we're going to do $1 million this year. I can't relate to $1 million. I've never seen $1 million. I don't know what it looks like. I don't know what it smells like. If I save 100% of my money for 20 years, I might see that. And you're throwing at me millions of dollars, right? So, but what I can relate to, you say, it cost me $1 million to run this business. I don't even know what that means. However, we do a metric called cost per minute. It costs $8.46 to run this business every minute, whether we do work or not. So, Mr. or Ms. So-and-so, you being 5 minutes late to this meeting and holding us up, that costs this business over $40 just by you being late. So all of you that are doing your shopping on Facebook or LinkedIn, or you're booking your vacation, or you're coming back a little late from work, I don't want to hear it during your reviews when you tell me you want more money. Because guess what? You burned it when you showed up 5 minutes late, because whether we do any business or not today, or not, it costs $8 a minute to run this business. And you all know how much money you waste every day. So when it comes time for bonuses, when do we get raises? I don't want to hear it because you know what? You're setting all of your raises and bonuses on fire because you can't show up on time, or you can't have consistent output. And so we like to bring it down to what's relevant and they can relate to.
Yeah, that's an interesting one because I remember when I was actually at one organization, what we had was we had a water gun on every meeting room table. And it was a funny way to be very exacting and kind of a little gross in how we handled, time management, but it was necessary. And then it became funny. Because what would happen is if you showed up, it was like when you showed up to school after homeroom bell rang, they closed and locked the door, and you like banged on the door looking through the window, and the teacher says, go down and get a late slip, right? So we would do the same thing in meetings, and you show up late, you get a chest full of water. Like you literally someone will give you 2 squirts. And it was campy. And because we knew what, in the end, it was like, look, we all have to respect each other's time. What ended up happening was it fundamentally changed the way we did time management as an organization, because this fun, campy thing ultimately meant that we were aware of the impact now of the cost of being late. Because you were late to one meeting, then you're going to stay late for the current one because you've lost respect for the time boundary.
Yeah.
And then as a result, it then trickles down into your task management and project management and cost management, right? So that funny little thing all of a sudden became a cultural win that affected productivity, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, and look, almost all of the people that I've met and worked with over the years, they genuinely want to do a good job. They don't want to be the one complaining, saying things aren't good for them, or they didn't produce, or they didn't get their job done on time, or if they were asked to do something extra, they just wanted to get it done and not be the one saying, I can't do it. And so with the best of intent, people try to spin all the plates and wear all the hats and handle everything. And what happens over time is when those boundaries are blurred, the business suffers overall. And that's why, so installing the discipline into the company is paramount, because ultimately, and that means you have to say no to certain things. And the organization has to make it okay to say no to certain things. So we have a policy in our office that you will not get in trouble for a mistake as long as you bring it to us first. We don't hear it from a client. We don't hear it from a colleague. Hey, I made a mistake, or I didn't do this, or I wasn't able to do that, get that done. We could bring it to us. And it could be a mistake. It could be a transgression. It could be something that doesn't get done. You have amnesty as long as we hear it from you. And what we have found is that helps people feel open to be vulnerable. And it's a safe space for them to share.
Yeah, that it becomes the thing of, transparency and trust that grows. And that was it. I remember my first legitimate, large business job. I worked at a huge insurance company doing desktop support. And something had gone wrong. And that was, my manager was like, by the time I got upstairs to think about how I was going to handle this, my manager had said, hey, so we got a call. I guess there was a problem. And he's like, if you feel like you're struggling with anything, he's like, just call. And that was exactly the phrase he says. You tell me there's a problem, we will fix this problem, and there's no negative result. He says, but it's when the customer calls, when the client calls, then I get worried, because this is, and ultimately I saw now, especially years later, because if you're willing to kind of hide that thing gets bigger at one point, and then you just get bigger at hiding. And it creates an unfortunate culture of self-protection out of fear, not even out of malice, just for fear of retribution. But if you open that up early and you create that transparency and trust, then, people are willing. The old classic quote is like, you don't fire the guy that made $1 million mistake, because he's never going to make 2 of those mistakes.
Right. That's true. Yeah. That's funny. The culture, what we, have been talking about a lot today is a performance-based culture, not an activity-based culture, but a performance-based culture. you take responsibility for your box. It's okay to admit a mistake and fix it. So it's a level of accountability. And this is where a lot of businesses actually make a mistake, is they'll try to hire great people. They'll try to instill a culture, and then they will put in accountability measures.
Right.
And we have found that that's the opposite, because usually accountability is a collateral damage to a good culture. And it doesn't have to be, but it oftentimes is. You get a great culture, and most people think that's about always agreeing and always being friendly and always and not holding somebody accountable. We say set the standards first. Then hire people that are willing to be judged by a standard, whatever that standard is. The right standard is the standard that everyone in the company agrees on. The company gets together and says, here's our rule book. Here is our playbook. Here's what we want to play by. And above the line, we're all good. Everybody's got a job. We do well. Fall below the line and we're in jeopardy, And so now all of a sudden, going back to our conversation earlier, what happens if somebody's floundering? Well, if we set a whole set of standards for the company and I've got goals for my box, if they're violating the standards or impacting my box, that covers 99% of the game right here.
Right.
The team will work together wherever they can't, management fills in. But as a company, you've got to set your standards first and then build the team around those standards.
Now, we've talked a lot, and this is very much in the self, I guess, of the organization. But if you don't mind, Carl, I'd love to hear, how do these methodologies relate to competitive positioning and measuring yourself against the outside forces, whether it's, natural business, and ultimately competitive forces that are in the market? How much do these same methodologies then translate to how you can compare against the outside forces that you can't necessarily affect? I'm curious how that comes into play.
How do you mean exactly?
Like, if I think of to measure success internally, of course, I have my own KPIs. I've got my measurements. I've got my understanding of the organizational structure. But then I've got, the other podcaster that's getting more guests than me or more ad money, right? Like, how do I then take the same methodology that I've built my foundation on and then look at measuring against external?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah. So I would, I'm not a huge fan of competition, meaning, if you have differentiated your business enough, you will have a core set of clientele, and your ability to satisfy and really make that core clientele happy, you could survive right alongside of somebody who is a quasi competitor. If you think about Billy Joel and Elton John, they are both piano playing pop and rock stars, and they came up around the same time. And yet, I don't know, I've never met somebody who says, oh no, sorry, I bought the Billy Joel album, I won't buy the Elton John album. I go to both concerts. As a matter of fact, they did a concert together, so a whole concert tour. And so to me, I like to say, who's my target client? My avatar, my ideal client profile, persona, there's a lot of different ways to call it. And then I say, what are the top 5 complaints they have about working with people in my industry? What's top of mind of them? What are they it drives them crazy. So I'll check out the reviews. I'll listen to the objections I get during my sales process. I'll listen to clients who say, well, I hired you because you do this better than the other people that we interviewed. And I'll say, okay, that's what's top of mind of these people. And I'll take those top 5 complaints, or if it's 3 or 7 or however many, but 5 seems to be the number. And I will weave them into my offerings. So you're afraid of people being late. All right, if we're late, we pay. You're afraid of the cost not remaining consistent. Great. You don't change the scope. We guarantee the price will be the same. We'll guarantee our work for a certain period of time. We'll be responsive. Whatever it is that, Zappos did this very well. Zappos in the beginning. Now we all think like, oh yeah, buying apparel online. Of course, everyone does it.
That's right. Makes sense now in hindsight, right?
It sure does, right? And in the beginning, everybody thought they were crazy. I don't know if you remember when Zappos first started out, they were just distributing shoes. And everyone was like, well, I'm not going to buy shoes off the internet. What if they don't fit? What if I don't like them? You're going to charge me shipping. Returning is a hassle. So they said, if you can't decide between two pairs, we'll send them both. Free shipping and free returns. So all they did was they took the top challenges off of the table. You're unsure about shopping online? It's okay. We'll send you everything you need. You're afraid of shipping costs? We'll take that off the table. You're afraid of returns and the hassle of that? We'll take that off the table. So in their case, it was 3, but they just promised that's not going to happen to you if you become our customer. And everyone was like, oh my God, what are you guys doing? And turned out not only were they very successful as a company, but they basically changed and trained everybody that it is okay to buy online apparel and clothes. And so, so to me, there's a lot of shoe distribution companies, but at any given time, there are industry complaints that someone is simply not addressing. And if you address them, you don't have competition. So I don't get too hung up on that. I am more concerned with who is my client, what do they want, and what will they pay for, and what will they overpay for? If they're passionate about what I do, would they pay a premium? And what would I have to provide so they would pay my premium? And I will go at it that way. And I think if your signature offering or skill or attribute about your company is unique enough, you will eliminate your competitors pretty quickly. 4ocean.com. Buy my bracelet, right? $20 bracelet, by the way, guys.
Yeah.
What does it cost? $1 to make, right? You go down to the Jersey Shore where I live, bracelets you can buy for $5 on the same rack as a bracelet for $20. But they say we will clean up a pound of plastic from our oceans and our beaches. And by the way, this thing you're about to put on your wrist is all post-consumable, recyclable plastic, and they sell like hotcakes. So if you differentiate yourself enough, plenty of bracelets you can buy, but they are 5 times the cost, and they sell at a higher clip.
Wait, and this is the interesting thing because it's not just the product that's differentiated; it's the way in which you deliver and maintain the relationship with the product. And like you said, it's funny even when I tell people that like we go through the rigmarole at the start, like this is what we're going to talk about, this is how we're not going to do it. And I often say like we can edit anything you want if you want to back anything out of it. Never had to do it. Only had to do it twice. Right. Once because actually the Wi-Fi was so bad we lost the signal and they couldn't even it was unlistenable. The second one was sadly the company was in the throes of a real difficult time and hadn't notified the people who were on the podcast. And then like 4 weeks later, they'd entered into a private equity acquisition and they had to suddenly shift. So they said probably would be ill-timed for us to release a podcast about our successes. And, fair enough. But in just laying that down up front, I've never had to edit because most people, they don't think about it. But I've worked with podcasters and broadcasters before. And if you don't say that at the start, the thing that gets said every time at the very end of the recording is, when can I get a copy of the recording so we can make sure that everything was okay and check for anything we need to edit out? And it's like an odd thing. That's why I'm like, I'm just going to say this right up front. I'm not going to edit this, but it's going to go great.
Yeah, right. Well, the funny thing about needs is when you satisfy someone's need, they no longer need it.
Yeah.
And so, so you're addressing for them what their concern is. And then, more than likely, because you were open and transparent and you were willing to address the concern, they felt like, oh, you know what, Eric's got his, hands, firmly on the wheel. He knows what he's doing. I can trust him. And that built a lot of credibility, likely.
Yeah, I years ago I was building PCs. Like that was like back in the day, that was a thing. I would build a bunch of desktop PCs, and I went to get a contract for a government, and it was funny. I'd never done this for a small government in Northern Ontario. So I submitted my RFP. I'm literally an 18-year-old kid, just like submitting this, like, why not? Let's just see if it works. And I had everything on price. I had it on all this stuff. And I was like, that was all I knew. I'm like, price it appropriately, make sure I nailed the story. They don't know me from Adam. hopefully my price works. In the end, they chose another provider, not because I was 18 years old and they didn't know me from Adam, but because that provider said, I'll give you 10 years warranty on the labor. And I hadn't said anything about that. And, after the fact, of course, because it's the way the contract works, you can't revisit it. And I thought to myself, I'll give you 99 years on the labor. I know I did it right the first time.
Sure.
It was just that assurance that
in that case, though, your competitor differentiated themselves enough.
They did,
and separated themselves enough. So well done them, It
was fantastic. That's exactly it. So it's funny. I think we get wrapped around the axle as like product creators and marketers and selling folks of like, we look to the outside to find what's prominent inside. And if you look at competitors more than you look at your customer problem, you're in real trouble, right? And it's easy but it's easy to do. It's very easy when you see the same name in every account and you're like, oh, good golly, here's product X again. But, if you find yourself focusing out, so that's the question, Carl. How often do people like get a little too focused on that? And how do you make sure you steer them back to that customer focus?
Yeah, it's really easy for a business owner to fall in love with their product or service, because we spend all day, every day thinking about it. We go get credentials. We all have alphabet soup after our name in our particular industry. We've gotten this degree and that accreditation and that license and that certification. So we figure, oh, well, if I'm thinking about it this much, everybody else must be too, and they must really care. They must really care about every little, feature of my product or service. I mean, just think about your phone. I don't know anybody who can use 100% of the functionality of their phone, and yet, so as a customer, as a provider, remember that it's really about understanding what they want and what features you offer that they really care about. I sat in on a keynote by Ronnie, I believe his name's Ronnie Wu. They were the second or the first ever fitness app licensee of Apple, and they created the Steps app for the Apple Watch. And in the first year, it was really successful. In the second year, they went back to the drawing board and they said, oh, it's not quite as accurate. You walk 10,000 steps and it really said you only walk 9,995. And so they poured all of this energy into being more accurate, only to find out people didn't really care. It's kind of good. I mean, with our phones, we have a camera on those. That camera is not nearly as good if you bought the cameras we used to own. Right. We had a flip phone and then we had a camera, right? The camera was great. And the camera on a phone is never going to be as good as a professional camera, but we will settle for less quality because it's not as important to us, right? The selfie, which is the most popular photo taken, has the inferior camera on the front. We know that with TikTok is based on selfie videos.
Yeah. They
are producing an entire website based on the lowest possible quality video that can be filmed on that phone. It's based on that, right? And so, and you would say, oh my God, well, we've got to make this better. Well, yeah, maybe, work hard at it, but let's make sure the customer actually cares. And you hear very successful social media influencers over and over and over again will tell you it's not about the video quality, guys. Doesn't have to be perfect. We're not filming an infomercial or doing a national television, and we're not broadcasting. We're not doing a movie. It's raw, it's authentic, it's me sharing me with you, and that's what you want. You want the authenticity. That's number one. Everything else beyond that, we can work on, but it's secondary.
Yeah, it becomes a way of like, what's the real, ultimately it goes back to the theory of constraints, right? What's the real constraint that you need to get away from? I, as a cyclist, and I've got a crazy expensive camera now just for fun, I'm a nerd, so let me get into it. But as a cyclist, I do the same thing. But I very quickly understand price to performance as a ratio. And someone would say to me like, well, goodness gracious, like you spent $2,000 on a bike, but I talk to the guy next to me and he'll spend $8,000 on the bike. And I would meet a lot of first time riders and they'd start off. And the first thing they do is they go to the bike shop and they ask the bike person, what kind of bike should I get? I'm thinking about going out for a weekend ride once in a while. Let me get you this $8,000 bicycle. And it becomes a thing where you literally chase grams and ounces, and so one of the guys that I ride with, he says, I'm thinking I need to upgrade my frame because I want to, I can take a pound off of this frame if it's 2,500 more, and then I can do this and do that and all these different things. And I said, what's even easier, Joe? Don't eat dessert twice a week, right? That's, you want to take a pound off your frame, you're going to save you money twice. You're going to eat less and you'll weigh 1 pound less.
Yeah.
The bike frame is not the problem.
Right. Sure. We can try to correct that all day long, but that's not the issue here.
But and I know I hate to open an exciting topic when we only got a couple minutes left, but pricing strategy we've talked about self, right? Managing the business as an entity that it evolves and leans on itself. And then how we deal with competition and what competition isn't more than what it is, which is great. But now when it comes to pricing, then how do we then take that service that we maybe know and love a little too much and then price it as we go to the market?
Yeah. So I'm a big fan of your pricing strategy being very in tune with your ideal client avatar, because in my way of thinking, your pricing strategy is the number one way that you communicate with your clientele. In other words, the moment you announce your pricing, how much you charge for whatever it is you do two things. Number one is you tell the marketplace who you are. If you charge $10,000 for a watch, you're telling people you're at the higher end of the marketplace. If you charge $100 for a watch, you're telling people you are at the lower end. And there's no better or worse. It's just you are signifying your spot in the marketplace. Second thing you're doing is you are telling your customer who they are. You are telling them what kind of buyer they are. And so that's a relationship you got to be very, very careful about. There's a few companies that really get it right. Subaru Motors really gets that right. I mean, they have a relationship with their clientele that's just unbelievable. Their marketing, their advertising is spot on. Rolex, Tesla, right? It doesn't have to be Walmart. They don't have to be luxury brands, right? They can be economy or value-based brands, but those are a couple that really know their customer, price themselves accordingly, and as a result, are constantly rewarded by their clientele. Apple does a good job as well.
Yeah, and even at the low end, like Swatch, great example, right? Low cost watches, but they have a perfect audience, right? Claire's, for tweens and stuff like that. It's like, this is not high dollar items, but the stores are full. They're doing it right.
Yeah, exactly. And so you understanding what type of buyer your client is important, because if you consider yourself a premium buyer, remember the Porsche guy, right? The Porsche guy, Porsche house, Porsche car, Porsche family, Porsche money, Porsche activities, they also likely consider themselves to be a luxury buyer. Right. So if you price something too low, they're not going to pay attention to it. You need to charge over a certain amount before they feel that it aligns with who they are. They don't want you putting out a value brand. The Porsche owners don't want the Porsche everyone can drive. That's the whole reason they bought a Porsche, is because not a lot of people can drive them. Whereas, if you were to gold plate a Subaru, they'd be like, why did you do that? That's a waste. Yeah. We are a utilitarian, societal conscious buying group. Why would you gold plate this thing? Why would you waste that precious earth, resource on a car when this is a utilitarian, safety-based buying group, right? And so you need to price yourself accordingly. Now, once you've done that, we are big fans of offering options with every with every product or service. In other words, if I'm selling you this pen, I will sell you this pen for $1. I will sell you a unlimited cap replacement option for $1.50. If for all of you lefties out there, I will guarantee that this doesn't smudge on your hand for $2. And then ultimately, if this pen ever dries out for $3, I will guarantee this thing for as long as you are alive. If this runs out, you send it back to us and we'll replace it for life. So we are big fans of saying, okay, within a category of buyers, there are different levels. And so this pen appeals to the person who likes this type of pen. But within that category, that subset, there are people that are willing to pay for more features or overpay. So if I'm a professional writer and I use this pen a lot and I'm lefty, I might go for that Mac Daddy guarantee because I don't like pens that smudge on my left hand. And if I lose a cap, which I always do, you'll replace it. And if this thing dries out, I write a lot, I want to know that I can get it replaced. So within that subset, I might be a buyer of this pen because you gave me the option to buy this thing for $3, so I never have to buy another one in my life. And so pricing, now that all just came through my pricing strategy, right? And so I just created an entire relationship. We've never met. I haven't even told you my mission, vision, values yet. You don't know if I'm saving the beaches or if I'm polluting the beaches, but I got your attention, didn't I? Now I will add other things. Exactly. I'm like, well, that's not a bad idea. I'm a lefty. I didn't know there was such a thing as a no smudge guarantee. And as a lefty, you know that we deal with that, right? So, your pricing strategy, to me, I can go on and on forever on this one. I'm really passionate about this, but your pricing strategy, you've got to nail it right. It is one of the first things we look at with our clientele because almost all of them have it wrong. Right. You're underpricing. You are offending your clientele in some case, and you are not creating a path for them to say, I am their best customer because I love them, right? So if you put on a concert, you have to have a front row seating pricing chart. So if somebody can say, I bought front row, I came here to see Eric, I paid the extra, and I will brag about it.
It's important. Oh, I tell you, Carl, this is fantastic. Thank you very much for sharing these incredible lessons. And I will recommend, I'll make sure I have links to your content, to your books. And if people want to engage you for hopefully to get some consulting, because I want to hire you right now. So we're going to work together on something for sure. It's been really, really great to share time. What's the best way that folks can reach out to you?
Well, best way to reach me would be through carlgould.com, CarlGould. My email is carl@carlgould.com. Very easy to find on the internet. And so if you find what I shared would be useful in your business or as a speaker at your next event, that would be a great introduction. So I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, I was going to make sure we made a note of that, is that you're not just a fantastic coach, consultant, and voice, in directly for your clients. You also do fantastic public speaking. So definitely a must-have for folks that want to really get their sales force, their customer base fired up. I'm excited. I know I want to go and I want to get to work right now. You've excited me. It's been a real good learning experience. So Carl, thank you very much for sharing the time today.
And thank you so much for the opportunity.
Okay, let's hit my record.